The Carolina Panthers had a disastrous first year with Bryce Young, but fortunately for them, I think I have an idea as to how we can fix them. So today, let's fix the Carolina Panthers. So in order to help the Carolina Panthers figure out their Bryce Young situation, we're going to be doing a handful of things. Number one, we're going to be cutting/letting a few players walk. We're then going to go into a re-sign and extension period, and we're going to go into a restructuring contract situation. Lastly, we're going to talk about 5 free agents who I think the Carolina Panthers should target. We will also discuss the NFL draft at the end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But let's go ahead and talk about the basics that we should go ahead and get out of the way before we actually start talking about different things. So for starters, the Carolina Panthers have about $30 million in cap space. And after our cuts, I think that we can open up another $15 to $20 million in cap space, give or take a couple million. Now, I'm not going to pretend to sit up here and tell you guys that I know everything about the salary cap, but we're going to make this a little bit of a fantasy rebuild, so just kind of go along with it, and if there's any sort of flaws, you can tell me in the comment section below. So I have a long list of players who, in my opinion, the Carolina Panthers should either cut or just let walk. This list of players are players who will either give back the Carolina Panthers money or not negatively impact their salary cap situation. So the players we're going to be cutting/letting walk are Ian Thomas, Terrence Marshall, Bradley Bozeman, Xavier Woods, DJ Chark, Jeremy Chin, and CJ Henderson. The majority of these guys did not play all that great last year, and I think moving forward, you probably don't need 90% of these guys because, well, you can open up cap space and they just don't play that well. This alone can open up easily over $10 million in cap space to let you go out there and sign another free agent. To me, of all the names that I've talked about, the only player that I think kind of hurts them is DJ Chark and maybe Jeremy Chin, because those guys are good players, but they just haven't played well with Carolina. But to me, I'm willing to grow that cap space number a little bit more to get rid of those guys. Next up, we're going to be doing a re-signing/extension phase. I only have 3 names on this list, and that is Frankie Louvu, Brian Burns, and Derek Brown. These are arguably the 3 best players on the Carolina Panthers, and with not a ton of cap space to work with, I hope that they can figure out the cap space situation to not hurt them that much while also bringing back these guys. Derek Brown is one of the better run stuffers in the league, and last year he was actually a pretty decent pass rusher, and moving forward, I think you want to have him as a long-term part of your team. Same thing sort of applies to Brian Burns, who is arguably the most valuable player on their franchise outside of Bryce Young. Brian Burns is a great pass rusher with a ton of capabilities. He's going to warrant a massive contract, so that does sort of concern me, but given the fact that he's young and a great player, you might want to bring him back. Next is Frankie Louvu, who had a surprisingly great season last year, and moving forward is a big part of their defense. So I understand you want to bring him back, give him an extension, and don't be too stingy with the money. I'd be willing to pay him some decent amount of money. Next, I have 2 players who I want us to restructure to grow the cap space out just a tad bit. Now, this is just 2 names, but I guarantee you there's about 10 guys who you can restructure to grow a little bit of cap space, but I went with their 2 higher paid players to grow a little bit more money, and that's Taylor Moton and Dante Jackson. I don't want to necessarily get rid of those guys, but I want to restructure their contracts to maybe front load it or back load it so that moving forward we have more money to go along with. And with all these moves, you're either going to grow your cap space or maybe lose a tad bit of money, but as a whole, you've gained in total about $20 to $30 million in cap space. Now, obviously, guys who I'm re-signing/extending are going to take a little bit of that cap space away, but they already get paid a good amount of money. It's just going to be a few more millions. So as a whole, in our fantasy scenario here, we've grown roughly to about $50 to $60 million in cap space. Again, we're being kind of rough here with the numbers. We're just sort of just being imaginative. Which then now brings us on to the free agency side of things. And of course, this team has a ton of needs. They need wide receiver help. They could use offensive line help. They could even use some help on the defensive side of things. So I got a few names of guys who I would bring in, and I have a small idea for what type of money they should be asking for. My number 1 priority for a player they should bring in is, of course, T. Higgins. I'd be willing to give him a contract worth about 4 years, roughly $80 to $90 million. That puts him in a range to be paid like a top 10 wide receiver in the league. Now, here's the thing. Is he a top 10 wide receiver in the league? No. Carolina doesn't really have the leverage to just go out there and give him some small-term deal. Now, Cincinnati might franchise tag T. Higgins, but that doesn't necessarily mean he has to sign that contract. And I think if Cincinnati is not willing to match Carolina Panthers' offer, I think he is a Carolina Panther. And here's the thing. Carolina could even offer him even more money. So I wouldn't be shocked if Carolina was to give him upwards of about $100 million because he is that valuable for this team. You give T. Higgins, Bryce Young, and I think moving forward, he could be that true receiver 1 this team needs. The next move I'd like to make would be addressing the center/guard position, and that is with Andre James, who I'm going to be giving a 3-year, $20 to $25 million type of contract. Andre James was a huge part of the Las Vegas Raiders offensive line, and last year he was one of the better offensive linemen in the entire league, especially at that center position. Now, I don't really know if he can fill in at guard or whatever need they have, but given how good of a player he is, I think that they could really use him. Last year in 963 snaps, he only had 3 penalties and only 4 sacks allowed, and he had a PFF grade of 74.6. This Carolina Panthers offensive line could really use a player of his stature, especially when it comes to the interior part of the offensive line. I think Andre James, for that type of money, would be a nice addition. The next player who I think could address a serious need for this team is J.K. Dobbins on a 1-year prove-it deal. J.K. Dobbins, when healthy, typically plays pretty well. Now, I understand that Miles Sanders did not play good last year, but I don't want to just necessarily completely ship him off. I think if J.K. can stay healthy, putting him next to a guy like Miles Sanders could really significantly help him. Miles Sanders could be that second option with more of that passing threat to him, whereas J.K. Dobbins could be your more traditional running back. And I think that was something that this year the Carolina Panthers really needed. Chuba Hubbard is decent, but he's nothing special. Granted, you could also just do Chuba Hubbard and J.K. Dobbins, and I wouldn't hate that much either. To me, J.K. could really use a brand new fresh start in a kind of a prove-it situation, so give him a 1-year, $1 to $2 million deal just to sort of have him prove his worth. The next player who I have on my list is super unrealistic, but I did just want to briefly mention his name. Again, I'm not going to have him as a significant part of this team's future, but if they can make the money, I would love this move, and that is, of course, Hollywood Brown, the receiver currently for the Arizona Cardinals. Again, I don't know how the financial situations would work, and I don't think it's realistic at all, but if you get Hollywood Brown to go along with T. Higgins, that would completely fix your receiving room. Hollywood Brown didn't have the greatest years last year, but wasn't really his fault. He didn't have Kyler Murray for 90% of the year, and he was also dealing with injuries. I'd be willing to give him a contract of somewhere along the lines of 3 years, $40 to $45 to $50 million. I think if they can grow that cap space somehow, that could be nice. But as I mentioned, that's just sort of an honorable mention rather than just somebody who I would say you have to go out there and get, so just keep that in mind. Those are the 3 offensive guys I have in mind. Now I have 2 defensive pieces that I think would be great, and that is Dorrance Armstrong and Geno Stone. Dorrance Armstrong has been an essential part of that Dallas Cowboys defense as sort of just a simple rotational guy. He's averaged about 8 to 10 sacks per year with the Dallas Cowboys and has been super underrated and super underpaid. The nice thing about Dorrance Armstrong is I don't really think he has to be that traditional 10 sack guy, but you're also not paying him to be a 10 sack guy. You're going to pay him somewhere along the lines of 3 years to $22 million, and he's going to go out there and get you 7 to 10 sacks per season. He's somebody who could be a part of your rotation, but can also be opposite of a guy like Brian Burns. On the year, Dorrance Armstrong had a PFF grade of 70.1 to go along with 20 tackles and 9 sacks, and I think moving forward, he'd be a great addition for this defensive line. I wouldn't be shocked if he has a more predominant role with this team if he was to get up to 10 to 12 sacks. I mean, he was obviously playing behind guys like DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons and still had 9 sacks. This would be a huge loss to the Dallas Cowboys, but if Carolina could get this guy, that would be such a nice move. The last player who I think they need to bring in would be Geno Stone, the safety for the Baltimore Ravens. He's super young, super dynamic, can make plays, and could be a traditional safety this team could really use. Last year, he had 50 solo tackles to go along with 7 interceptions on 25 receptions allowed and had a PFF grade of 71.9. And this is a guy who's a nice culture fit to go along with a defense that could really use a new cornerstone in that safety room. This to me would be a premier addition that wouldn't really break the bank either. Because based off everything I've been hearing, you're going to be giving him a deal worth roughly 3 years, $25 to $30 million for a fantastic safety. So if you're paying a guy $8 to $10 million to be a great safety, I say why not? Geno Stone is that guy. Don't be fooled by the fact that he was taken in the 7th round in 2020. He is legit. And in my opinion, for Carolina, this would be a home run off season for them. But now that we've talked about all the additions and subtractions of this team, let's talk about the NFL draft. Obviously, no first round pick, and that sucks. Could they trade up? Maybe. Should they trade up? Probably not. This is not a team that has a ton of capital and a ton of stuff to just go ahead and throw out to go get a first round pick. Isn't really needed, especially in a draft that is full of a ton of talent in the first, second, third rounds. As it sits right now, they have 6 picks in this upcoming draft. They have the 33rd overall pick, the 65th overall pick, they have their own 4th, they have the San Francisco 5th, the Tennessee Titans 5th, and the Arizona Cardinals 6th. I think with your second round pick, if they were to do the moves that I think they will make, I don't really know if receiver's that big of a need. I would probably go for offensive tackle. Maybe you could go a secondary member or just best available. Because the truth is, the 33rd overall pick is essentially a first round pick. I mean, you're literally picking 1 pick after the 32nd overall pick, which is of course a first round pick. So you're going to get a first round talent basically because, well, this is a loaded draft class. I think there's guys out there like Adonai Mitchell, maybe Amarius Mims, maybe Troy Fautanu falls, so on and so forth. They're going to have a ton of guys on the board. And I'll throw a name out there who I freaking love for the Carolina Panthers, and that's Ja'Tavion Sanders, the tight end for the Texas Longhorns. It's a tight end driven league, and I think if you're the Carolina Panthers, you don't really have that guy. And if you can go out there and get a dynamic pass catcher like Ja'Tavion Sanders, that would be a great fit. Imagine a hypothetical scenario where you get better in the receiving room, better along the offensive line, better in the running back room, better in the coaching staff room, and now you're fixing your tight end room. That could be nice, especially for Bryce Young, who's super young. Now, Ja'Tavion has flaws. He's not the greatest run blocker, but his pros outweigh his cons in my opinion. So again, I would throw my pick there, Ja'Tavion Sanders, but you can also take a tackle, wide receiver, corner, linebacker, basically whatever you want. And then with our third round pick, again, I think you just go best available with positions of need you have, whether that is an offensive tackle or wide receiver or so on and so forth. I think you just go best case scenario for every single pick. And of your 6 picks, you're really just shooting for 3 of the 6 guys to be role players and maybe one of them to be a star. So if hypothetically you go Ja'Tavion Sanders, offensive tackle, and then the rest of your picks are just whatever, and one of them turns out to be a star and 2 of them turn out to be good rotational players for you, and the rest of them are just, depth options or something, that's great. This is not a team that really has to go out there and just blow out this year's draft because, well, they have so many different holes that it's going to be very difficult for them to do so, especially with no number 1 overall pick. But I think all in all, the big priority has to be surrounding Bryce Young with talent. And I think this offseason, going out there and getting T. Higgins, J.K. Dobbins, Andre James, hypothetically Ja'Tavion Sanders, potentially Hollywood Brown, and adding some pieces all on the defense would be a fantastic start to your rebuild. Now again, this is a more fantasy rebuild. This is not a realistic one. This is not something that I'm just going out there and calculating the numbers with a pencil and doing this super nerdy NFL stuff. No, that's not the point of this video. This is for me just saying, do this, try this, maybe you can do this. Throwing out some different options for you guys. And I think if they do this, you'd have an offense of Bryce Young, good running backs, decent offensive line, good receivers, Ja'Tavion Sanders, J.K. Dobbins. Just saying, could be nice. But it's always hard to tell with these type of videos. Hopefully you did enjoy though. Love you.